There's a certain kind of person who never stops moving. You've seen them. You might even be one of them. They're always working, always improving, always pushing. On the outside, they look disciplined, ambitious, maybe even admirable. But on the inside, there's a different energy driving the whole machine. Something quieter, older, and far more complicated than simple motivation. This chapter is about that hidden engine. Some people turn their emotional pain into productivity without even realizing it. It doesn't show up as sadness or anger. It shows up as a full calendar, an overstuffed to-do list, a compulsion to achieve, fix, or outperform. When they feel overwhelmed, they don't freeze. They accelerate. When life gets difficult, they don't collapse. They build something. It's a survival instinct disguised as ambition. For many, this way of living starts long before adulthood. It starts in those early moments when a child learns that being useful earns praise, or that staying busy keeps the household emotions stable, or that accomplishing things brings a sense of control in a world that feels unpredictable. Over time, productivity becomes a kind of emotional armor. It keeps the deeper feelings tucked safely behind accomplishment after accomplishment. By the time this person grows up, they don't even question it. Constant productivity feels natural. It feels necessary. Stillness, on the other hand, can feel unfamiliar, almost threatening. The moment they stop moving, the thoughts they've been avoiding start rising to the surface, and that's often the part they fear the most. There's a quiet belief underneath all this. If I keep producing, nothing bad will catch up to me. It's not something they say out loud. It's not something they even consciously understand. But it drives them just the same. Rest feels like a risk. Achievement feels like safety. This doesn't mean productivity is bad. In fact, it often leads to impressive accomplishments. Many high achievers owe their success to this coping pattern. But what the outside world praises is usually very different from what the inside world feels. People seldom realize how much anxiety and pressure live underneath that polished exterior. For some, the productivity is constant. For others, it comes in cycles, bursts of obsession followed by a crash, then another climb. But the emotional pattern is usually the same. Working becomes the easiest way to avoid confronting the parts of life that feel too heavy, too disappointing, or too vulnerable. This chapter sets the foundation for what follows. The real story behind constant productivity isn't about ambition. It's about protection. It's about the subtle ways people convert emotional weight into motion, effort, and output. And once you understand that conversion, how pain becomes productivity, you can begin to see why stopping has never felt safe, why slowing down feels uncomfortable, and why some people stay in motion for years without ever asking why. As we move to the next chapter, we'll dig deeper, not into adulthood, but into where the pattern usually begins. The early moments, the small interactions, the subtle emotional landscapes that quietly teach a child the difference between safety and vulnerability. This is where pain-driven productivity truly starts, and understanding those beginnings is the first key to understanding the entire psychology behind it. Before constant productivity becomes a lifestyle, it starts as a lesson, one learned quietly, long before we ever write our first resume or make our first goal list. These early lessons don't announce themselves. They arrive in moments, in tones of voice, in the emotional weather of a household. They're absorbed, not taught. This chapter is about those early blueprints, the unnoticed origins of the drive to stay busy, to be useful, to never rest for too long. For many people, Pain-driven productivity begins in childhood environments where love, attention, or stability felt inconsistent. Maybe praise only came when you performed well. Maybe affection arrived when you behaved perfectly. Or maybe staying productive was simply the safest way to avoid the storms around you, those emotional floods that erupted without warning. In households shaped by chaos, a child quickly learns to stay alert, to anticipate needs, to act before something goes wrong. Work becomes safety. Busyness becomes a shield. Achieving becomes the only place where things feel predictable. That early hyper-awareness, when carried into adulthood, often transforms into perfectionism, overachievement, or the instinct to stay in motion at all costs. In quieter homes, the blueprint forms differently, but carries the same weight. A parent who's withdrawn or emotionally distant can unintentionally teach a child that the way to earn connection is through usefulness. A child whose inner world feels unnoticed may latch onto productivity as a way to be seen. If I can do more, maybe I'll matter more, becomes an unspoken equation, internalized long before the child can articulate it. Then there are the homes where everything seems fine on the surface. No shouting, no chaos, but expectations run deep. Success is not encouraged, it's required. Mistakes feel unacceptable. Rest feels unearned. The child in this environment grows up believing that worth is always conditional and must always be proven. And so the pattern forms. Work equals safety, productivity equals approval, achievement equals value. What's fascinating is how seamlessly these lessons hide themselves. By the time someone reaches adulthood, they don't remember the moment they learned to run instead of rest. They don't notice the link between their childhood home and their present-day habits. They just know that slowing down feels wrong, uncomfortable, foreign. Even if their life is calm now, their nervous system still behaves like it's protecting a fragile, unpredictable environment. Some people remember specific moments that shaped them. A parent who only praised straight A's. A home where tension always waited beneath the surface. A childhood where responsibility came too early. But many people don't remember anything dramatic. The lesson formed in the small, subtle patterns they lived through every day. And because these early experiences shape the brain when it's most impressionable, the effects last long into adulthood. They influence how we respond to fear, failure, disappointment, or even quiet moments. They build the instinct to keep moving, keep working, keep producing. Understanding that these patterns have roots doesn't blame the past. It simply explains the present. When someone grows up learning that their safety depends on performance, adulthood becomes one long performance. When they learn that worth must be earned, they carry that belief everywhere. When they learn that being useful is the only way to matter, they build a life full of busyness before they ever ask whether they want it. This chapter matters because it reveals something important. Productivity isn't random. It isn't just personality. It often comes from emotional architecture built long before we were conscious of building anything. As we move into the next chapter, we'll look at what happens when the world rewards these patterns. Because once childhood wiring meets adult praise, something powerful happens. The survival strategy becomes a lifestyle, and the lifestyle becomes celebrated. And that celebration creates a loop that's hard to break. By the time someone reaches adulthood, their childhood wiring around productivity meets a whole new environment, one that praises output, rewards busyness, and celebrates the very behaviors that once developed as protection. And that's where things get complicated. This chapter is about the moment pain-driven productivity stops being a survival instinct hiding in the background and becomes a reinforced, self-feeding loop. Once you start performing in the real world, school, work, relationships, you quickly learn that society admires people who go above and beyond. Teachers praise the overachiever. Employers reward the one who stays late. Friends rely on the dependable one who never drops the ball. People start to see you as the reliable, responsible, capable person they can count on. What they don't see is the fear behind it. The fear of letting someone down, the fear of slowing down, the fear of not being enough. They see the results, not the origin. And because the results look so admirable on the outside, the world keeps reinforcing the behavior on the inside. This creates the reward loop. First comes the praise, then comes the sense of relief. Okay, I'm still valuable. I'm still safe. Then comes the expectation to do it again, and again, and again. Soon productivity isn't just something you do. It becomes part of who you are. People expect you to always be on, to always deliver, to always push, and you rise to that expectation because, for you, stopping feels more uncomfortable than continuing. Every success brings a rush. Not just pride, but relief. The kind of relief that calms the nervous system for a moment, like an emotional exhale. And because the relief feels so good, it becomes addictive. Not in the sense of pleasure, but in the sense of escape. The brain learns something powerful. When I achieve, the anxiety quiets down. When I slow down, it gets louder. So naturally, you choose the path that keeps the noise away. This loop is reinforced constantly. Promotions, good grades, compliments, admiration. These become confirmation that the strategy is working. Even if the strategy is built on fear, it's still effective. The world gives you rewards. Your brain gives you relief. And together, they make it nearly impossible to step off the treadmill. What makes this loop even stronger is that high achievement actually does produce real opportunities. People who are driven, whether by passion or pain, often succeed. They create, build, accomplish, and improve at impressive rates. And because their success is real, it's easy to believe the story the world tells them. You're successful because you're disciplined, not you're successful because you're afraid to stop. And so the identity grows. When productivity becomes your identity, you don't just lose yourself when you stop. You fear that others will stop loving you, admiring you, or needing you. Productivity becomes the currency of your worth. And when you start believing that worth is earned one task at a time, rest becomes a luxury you feel you can't afford. This reward loop isn't purely psychological. It's physical. The brain releases dopamine during achievement, creating a temporary lift. The relief from anxiety becomes a chemical reward, and the fear that returns during downtime becomes a chemical withdrawal. Some people describe this cycle as being addicted to hustle. But that phrase oversimplifies what's really happening. It's not the hustle they're addicted to. It's the emotional stability that the hustle provides. The work isn't the goal. The work is the shield. Understanding this loop is crucial because it explains why people who want to slow down can't. They're not lacking discipline. They're not disorganized. They're not making excuses. They're stuck in a loop that was formed by early emotional conditioning and reinforced by adult rewards. Breaking that loop isn't as simple as deciding to rest more. Rest doesn't feel restful when your brain has learned to equate stillness with danger. Rest feels like exposure, vulnerability, and risk. Productivity feels like protection. This chapter closes with an important truth. The reward loop doesn't start maliciously. It starts innocently, almost naturally. But once it forms, it becomes a cycle that shapes identity, behavior, and emotional habits for years. Once productivity becomes more than a habit, once it becomes the way you define yourself, the stakes change completely. It's no longer about getting things done or chasing improvement. It's about maintaining the version of yourself that the world expects and that you secretly fear you must uphold. This chapter explores the moment when productivity shifts from behavior to identity. When the question is no longer, "What did I do today?" but "Who am I if I'm not doing anything?" The identity trap begins quietly. It starts the first time someone praises you for being the hard worker, the responsible one, the person who always delivers. At first, it feels good, maybe even affirming. But over time, those labels start to feel less like compliments and more like obligations. They become the roles you feel required to play, even when you're tired, overwhelmed, or drifting away from what you actually want. When productivity becomes your identity, slowing down feels like erasing yourself. A person caught in this trap often feels an internal conflict they can't easily name. On one hand, they crave rest, peace, or even just a moment to breathe. On the other hand, rest brings an uncomfortable emptiness, like stepping into a room with no furniture, nothing to hold on to, nothing to hide behind. That quiet space can feel threatening because it forces you to face the parts of yourself that achievement has always shielded you from. And so the cycle tightens. You keep producing because it's the only version of yourself that feels familiar. You keep pushing because it's the only way you know how to stay valuable. You chase goal after goal because each accomplishment buys you temporary assurance that you're still enough, still wanted, still worthy. The fear doesn't always present as fear. Sometimes it shows up as irritation when you're forced to rest, guilt when you're not doing enough, or panic when you fall behind your own impossible expectations. Other times it shows up as numbness, an inability to feel satisfied no matter how much you accomplish. People in the identity trap often hear compliments but struggle to believe them. Success becomes a moving target. The moment they reach one goal, they immediately look for the next. They rarely celebrate. They rarely pause. They rarely acknowledge how much they've already done. Because resting feels like you're slipping. Because slowing down feels like you're becoming someone lesser. Because your worth feels tied not to who you are, but to what you produce. This trap can also distort relationships. If you believe your worth is measured by usefulness, you may overextend yourself in friendships, at work, or in your family. You may give more than you have. You may become the fixer, the helper, the stable one. Roles that people appreciate, but that quietly drain you. And when you try to set boundaries or step back, the guilt hits like a wave. It's not that you want to be needed. It's that you fear who you are when you're not. One of the most painful parts of the identity trap is realizing how much of your life has been built around avoiding stillness. Work becomes distraction. Plans become escape. Productivity becomes a mask that even you start believing in. And when that mask becomes your identity, it's hard to imagine who exists underneath it. But the truth is, there is someone underneath. Someone who existed before the labels. Someone who isn't defined by output or usefulness. Someone who has worth beyond what they contribute. Most people don't realize they're in the identity trap until something interrupts the pattern. A setback, a failure, a pause they didn't choose. And when that moment comes, everything they've been avoiding surfaces at once. It's overwhelming, uncomfortable, and often confusing. But it's also the start of understanding. Every system built on overextension eventually reaches its limit. Even the strongest engine overheats when it runs without pause. And for people who turn pain into productivity, that limit often arrives quietly at first. Soft warnings, subtle fatigue, small slips in focus, until one day it stops being subtle. This chapter is about the moment the pattern collapses, the point where productivity, once protective, becomes unsustainable. Burnout rarely begins with a dramatic breakdown. It usually begins with small signals that are easy to ignore. Waking up tired no matter how much you sleep, feeling emotionally flat, losing interest in things that once brought satisfaction. You start making simple mistakes, forgetting details, or struggling to feel motivated, even for tasks you used to handle effortlessly. But because your identity is tied to productivity, you don't interpret these signals as exhaustion. You interpret them as failure. So you push harder, you drink more coffee, you extend your hours, you sacrifice your downtime. You try to outrun the fatigue the same way you've been outrunning your emotions for years. For a while, it works, at least on the outside. You still perform, you still deliver, you still maintain the image of the person who always has it together. But inside, the strain grows heavier. The gap between what others see and what you feel widens. The world sees competence. You feel like you're crumbling behind the scenes. Eventually comes the crash. It might show up as emotional burnout, irritation, numbness, hopelessness, or it might be physical. Headaches, insomnia, constant tension. A body that refuses to cooperate no matter how hard you push. For some people, burnout appears as a sudden breaking point. A moment when something minor happens, yet it feels like the entire world is collapsing. This is the burnout wall, the place where your coping mechanism stops being effective, the place where productivity can no longer shield you from what you've been avoiding, the place where the inner system says, "I can't carry this anymore." Ironically, many people hit this wall not because they're weak, but because they've been strong for far too long. They've carried burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. They've maintained an image of reliability that demanded more energy than anyone realized. They've treated rest as an enemy instead of a necessity. The burnout wall forces a confrontation. When you physically or emotionally can't keep producing, you're left face to face with the truth you've been sprinting away from. Productivity was never the cure. It was the distraction. And yet, hitting this wall isn't a failure. It's a turning point. Burnout reveals what your body and emotions have known all along. That constant busyness is not sustainable. That worth is not measured by output. That survival strategies don't work forever. It's the moment when the old method breaks, making room for a new one to form. Some people feel shame when they reach this point, as if they're disappointing the people around them. Others feel lost because the coping pattern they relied on for years suddenly disappears. But underneath the confusion is something important, an opportunity, a rare chance to understand yourself without the constant noise of achievement. The burnout wall is painful, but it's also clarifying. It forces you to examine the beliefs that kept you running. It pushes you to reconsider the relationship between your emotions and your accomplishments. It invites you to ask the question you've avoided for years. What if productivity isn't the only way I know how to live? When the burnout wall forces everything to slow down, sometimes by choice, sometimes by collapse, it creates an unexpected kind of silence. And in that silence, a new question begins to form. What if I don't want to live like this anymore? That question is the beginning of the reframe. This chapter is about shifting from pain-driven productivity to intentional productivity. It's about understanding that your worth isn't built on output, and your identity isn't defined by constant motion. The reframe doesn't happen all at once. It often begins with a realization that feels almost too simple to take seriously. You've been running, not because you wanted to, but because you felt like you had to. That distinction, want versus need, is the doorway into an entirely different way of living. At first, the reframe can feel uncomfortable. When you're used to measuring your value in tasks completed, stepping back can feel like losing control. Rest feels unfamiliar. Quiet feels suspicious. But slowly, your nervous system begins to learn something new. Nothing bad actually happens when you pause. The world doesn't collapse. People don't abandon you. You don't lose everything you've built. You start to see that the fear was never about productivity. It was about the emotions underneath it. As this awareness grows, you begin questioning the old beliefs that once felt like truth. Do I really need to earn my worth every day? Do I have to stay busy to feel safe? Is my productivity the only thing people value about me? Asking these questions doesn't dismantle the old identity overnight, but it begins loosening its grip. You start creating a tiny bit of distance between you and the pattern that used to define you. For the first time, you see your productivity not as who you are, but as something you do, something you can choose, something you can set down. This is where intentionality enters the picture. Instead of working to outrun feelings, you work because you want to build something meaningful. Instead of saying yes automatically, you pause and ask whether it aligns with your values. Instead of fearing rest, you begin viewing rest as a resource, something that recharges your creativity instead of threatening your identity. The reframe also brings a new understanding of emotional health. You begin recognizing that feelings you once pushed aside, anxiety, sadness, disappointment, anger, aren't enemies. They're signals. They point to needs that productivity was covering up. You slowly learn to sit with them instead of sprinting past them. That willingness to face emotions directly is where real change begins. It creates space to heal the wounds that once fueled the constant motion. It allows you to develop new ways of coping, ones that don't require exhausting yourself just to feel stable. The reframe often involves experimenting with boundaries, something that used to feel dangerous. You start saying no to commitments that drain you. You set limits on work. You allow yourself downtime without guilt. At first, these boundaries feel like rebellion, but over time they feel like self-respect. And as these small changes accumulate, you begin noticing something surprising. Your productivity doesn't disappear. It becomes more powerful, more purposeful, more aligned with who you actually are, rather than who you're afraid not to be. Without the weight of fear behind it, productivity becomes creative, energized, and sustainable. The reframe shifts your internal compass. You stop asking, "How much can I do?" and start asking, "What do I want my life to look like?" You stop living in reaction to old wounds and start living in connection to your present values. You stop performing and start choosing. This chapter isn't about perfection or instant transformation. It's about noticing the moment when you finally have a choice. For the first time, you're not driven solely by the pressure to prove yourself. You can work because you want to. You can rest because you need to. You can step back without feeling like everything will fall apart. The reframe shows you the possibility of a life where productivity is no longer a shield, but a tool. Something you use with intention rather than rely on for survival. Reframing your relationship with productivity is a powerful shift, but it's only the beginning. Understanding why you've lived the way you have doesn't automatically change years of habit, conditioning, and emotional wiring. Integration is where the real work happens, the slow, steady process of living differently day after day. This chapter explores how people begin to build a life beyond pain-driven achievement. It's not about abandoning ambition or shrinking from goals. It's about creating a more balanced internal landscape where productivity, rest, emotion, and identity coexist without competing for survival. Integration begins with awareness. You start noticing the subtle moments when old patterns try to pull you back. The urge to say yes when you're exhausted, the twitchy discomfort during downtime, the guilt that bubbles up when you're not being productive. These moments used to control you. Now you recognize them, you name them, and naming them gives you a tiny amount of power you didn't have before. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause. That pause, small as it is, becomes the foundation of integration. During this stage, emotional regulation becomes essential. You slowly learn how to sit with the feelings you once tried to outrun. Maybe you feel anxiety when you rest, or fear when you set boundaries, or sadness when you stop distracting yourself with achievement. These feelings were always there. They simply had no space to surface before. Allowing yourself to feel them doesn't weaken you. It steadies you. It builds resilience of a completely different kind, one that doesn't rely on constant output. Integration also involves redefining success. You start noticing that success isn't just the big accomplishments or the visible achievements. Sometimes it's the quiet moments when you choose rest without guilt. Sometimes it's recognizing that you don't need to earn your value. Sometimes it's saying no because you finally understand your limits. You begin to see success as a spectrum rather than a scoreboard. Another important part of integration is reconnecting with parts of yourself that got lost in the noise of productivity. The creative side you set aside, the playful side, the curious, spontaneous parts that didn't fit into the structure of constant busyness. When productivity isn't consuming your identity, these parts start resurfacing, reminding you that you're more than your output. Another shift happens in relationships. When you no longer define your worth by usefulness, you stop overgiving. You stop trying to fix everything for everyone else. You begin expressing your needs instead of burying them. You build connections based on authenticity rather than obligation. Some relationships deepen, others fade. But the ones that remain begin to support the person you truly are, not the performer you once felt pressured to be. Integration isn't linear. There are days when old patterns take over, when you slip back into overworking or avoidance. But the difference now is that you notice it sooner. You recover faster. You no longer mistake relapse for failure. You see it as part of the process. Healing shows up not in the absence of old habits, but in the speed and compassion with which you return to your new ones. As you continue integrating these changes, something subtle but profound happens. Rest becomes less frightening. Instead of feeling exposed, you begin to feel grounded. Stillness stops being empty and starts being restorative. Productivity stops being a lifeline and becomes one part of a balanced life. You also discover a deeper truth. You don't lose your ambition when you heal. You don't lose your drive, your creativity, or your dreams. In fact, these things often grow stronger, because when you're no longer pushing yourself out of fear, You finally have the freedom to pursue goals out of genuine inspiration. Your work becomes more meaningful. Your energy becomes more sustainable. Your achievements feel different, lighter, more authentic, more aligned with a version of you that isn't fighting for survival. Integration is where pain-driven productivity evolves into self-aware, self-directed creation. It's where you reclaim your time, your emotions, and your identity. It's where productivity becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. And when this integration takes root, you reach the final stage of the journey, the part where your story begins shaping your future rather than reacting to your past. That path emerges in the last chapter, where everything we've explored comes together into a vision of sustainable growth, grounded purpose, and a new definition of what it means to truly thrive. Reaching the end of this journey doesn't mean the story is over. In many ways, it marks the beginning of a new, more conscious chapter of life, one where productivity no longer masks pain, where achievement doesn't have to come at the cost of emotional well-being, and where your identity is no longer fused to the things you produce. This final chapter brings everything together into a clearer understanding of what it means to grow beyond pain-driven productivity. You started as someone shaped by early blueprints, childhood lessons about worth, safety, and responsibility that quietly became the operating system behind your adult behavior. The constant push to stay busy wasn't ambition, it was protection. Productivity served as a buffer between you and the emotions you didn't feel ready to face. It kept you safe, but it also kept you trapped. As you moved through this story, you saw how the world reinforces these patterns. Society rewards overachievers, celebrates hustle, and praises people who never show cracks. In that environment, pain-driven productivity doesn't just survive, it thrives. And because the outside world applauds your efforts, it becomes even harder to see what's really happening underneath. Eventually, though, the system hits its limit. The burnout wall forces the truth into the open. The very strategy that once kept you stable is now depleting you. When your mind or body can no longer maintain the pace, you're left face to face with the emotional architecture you've been sprinting past. But that moment of collapse, as painful as it is, creates the space for change. The reframe begins when you finally question the story you've lived by. You start distinguishing between survival and choice, between fear and intention. You realize that rest doesn't erase your worth, and achievement doesn't define who you are. You rediscover an inner self that has value independent of output. Integration then turns understanding into practice. It's slow, imperfect, and deeply human. You learn to pause before slipping back into old habits. You learn to tolerate stillness without fear. You learn to listen to your emotions rather than bury them under busyness. You rebuild your identity piece by piece, not around productivity, but around authenticity. By the time you arrive at this final chapter, something remarkable has taken place. You haven't abandoned productivity. You've reclaimed it. You've separated the parts of your drive that were born from fear from the parts that come from genuine passion. You've created space for creativity, rest, connection, and meaning. Things that couldn't flourish when your life was built entirely on motion. And this is the real transformation. Productivity is no longer the engine of survival. It's a tool, a choice, an expression of who you are, not a substitute for it. A life built this way isn't perfect, but it's grounded. You can work hard without burning out. You can rest without guilt. You can pursue big goals without sacrificing your inner world. You can grow without running. This conclusion isn't a neat ending, it's an opening. It marks the shift from reacting to your past to shaping your future. The emotional wounds that once drove you don't disappear, but they stop ruling your decisions. They become part of your story, not the author of it. And perhaps most importantly, you learn that worth was never something you had to earn. It was always there, underneath the motion, beneath the achievements, waiting for the moment you finally slowed down enough to see it. Your journey forward is no longer about proving yourself. It's about expressing yourself. No longer about staying busy, but about living fully, aligned, aware, and free. That is the psychology of people who turn pain into productivity, and that is the story of how they learn to turn it into something far healthier. A life they consciously choose.